It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ira Chaleff, author of The Courageous Follower.
You don't become a courageous follower overnight. It's something you develop as a way of being, as a way of relating to your leaders, as a way of fulfilling your mission. Let's expand this topic beyond just how you correct the abuses of power, and let's look at how do you support the beneficial use of power by leaders. The basic model that I use is non-hierarchical. It's a relationship where followers don't serve leaders, but rather followers and leaders serve the mission. They serve the common purpose. And they do so professionally within a shared set of values and norms. The essential role, the way of seeing yourself, is as a partner in achieving a mission with a shared sense of values and being equally accountable for the success of the mission and the adherence to those values. In the real world, we have to factor in several other things, one of which is self-interest. All of us bring self-interest to our jobs, both in the leader role and in the follower role. And self-interest, in fact, contains a lot of energy. We do a lot of things out of care for our reputation and our professional advancement that really help the mission. So there's nothing wrong with self-interest as long as it doesn't overshadow the mission. But it's very important to keep in mind as a leader, what is the self-interest of my followers? How can I help them in their professional aspirations? But equally, and sometimes this is given less thought, as a follower, it's very important to keep in mind, what is the self-interest of my leader? How can I help him or her to achieve his or her goals in life and meet his or her needs? Because sometimes when you want to influence upward, you have to frame your arguments both in terms of the mission and the values, and also in terms of the leader's self-interest. Sometimes it's ill-advisable for a leader to do something that he or she is about to do, and they can only see that if you help them understand both the policy and law, but also where the self-interest lies. Out of this very central model, I developed then a model of the 5 behaviors that constitute courageous followership. The first behavior is the courage to assume responsibility for the mission, for the purpose, to take the initiative. Interestingly enough, the last dissertation done found that this behavior was valued by leaders in their followers more than all the other behaviors combined. The next behavior is the courage to support the leader in the group energetically. Leaders are under a lot of stress at times. Sometimes we can't understand the stresses they're under and why they behave the way they do. It's really in our self-interest as well as our group interest to pay attention to the stresses that our leaders are under and to do what we can to help them manage those stresses. If the leader is doing something that is somehow potentially hurting the mission or the morale, then we have to speak up. Then we have to constructively question or challenge what they're doing, and we have to find ways to do this diplomatically and effectively. The fourth set of behaviors is the courage to participate in transformation. It is always easier to see what the other person in the relationship has to change rather than what we have to change. So if we're struggling in a relationship with a leader, one of the things we have to do is shine the spotlight on ourselves and say, in what ways am I doing things that may be evoking the responses I'm not happy with from my leader, or in what ways may I be enabling the behavior of my leader, and how can I change that? And the last piece is the courage to take a moral stand when necessary. This happens rarely, but when it does, it can be the most important piece or nexus point of your career. So at times, we really are called upon to make very, very tough choices in the face of the power differential. And we have to have the aplomb to do that. You are leaders, you are followers. Leadership is not something that just occurs at the top of the organization and followership at the bottom. Leaders and followers exist at every level of the organization. They're roles you play, And sometimes you play one role, sometimes you play the other, sometimes you play both almost simultaneously. And the question is, how do you do both courageously and effectively? Well, one thing you have to bear in mind is the organizational culture. In any group, there tends to be an in-group and an out-group. Remember middle school, junior high school? In-groups and out-groups. And we all want to try to stay in the in-group if we can. And we get worried that if we speak up with too much divergence, that we might be just gently or not so gently pushed into the out-group. You really don't want to be pushed into the out-group. This becomes an inhibiting factor at times of speaking up. And it's useful to identify what's going on, because if we can identify what the real nature of the risk is, not the imagined nature, not exaggerate the risk, then we can take calculated decisions about whether this risk is worth taking at this time and how to mitigate the potential fallout of that risk. That in the age of Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, that if dissent can't be managed constructively within an organization, it will go outside the organization, and it will be much more difficult to manage the repercussions of that. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what we need in the face of fear. As a leader, your job is actually, one of your jobs, is to reduce the need for courage to speak courageously. Every manager in America believes that he or she has an open-door policy and that anyone can come in and feel safe about telling them anything candidly. But we all know that that isn't always true, that we don't feel safe about doing that with all of the people we report to. It's not enough to just believe that we're a good person, that we're a good manager. We actually have to work to create those conditions. And it takes time. It takes time to build the trust and the street creds, if you will, so the word gets out that it really is safe. You have to be very consistent. When people walk in and take a risk, you have to listen with all your best listening skills, and you have to make sure that when they walk out, they don't ever regret having come in and to get a fair hearing, that nothing ever comes back to haunt them or hurt them because they took the risk to speak up. Sometimes you'll be able to satisfy their needs, sometimes you won't, but they know that it's safe to have that conversation with you. You will then actually be a manager who has a real open-door policy. A self-assessment instrument that helps you understand your current followership style. Basically, it's based on two of the attributes of courageous followership: how well you support your leaders and how willing you are to speak up and dissent when needed. And as a result, you can be in one of these four styles in relation to a specific leader. The bottom two styles need to increase their supportiveness for leaders in order to be more effective. The implementer style, which is very high in support, needs to increase the willingness to speak up, to move out of the comfort zone and speak their truth when needed. And those already in the partner zone, if you will, where there's some balance between the willingness to support and to speak up, may need to increase one or the other or both sides here. Courage doesn't just happen. You have to develop it. Yes, there are acts of courage when you see a child suddenly fall into the swimming pool and maybe you're not a good swimmer, you just dive in and pull them out. That's an instinctual courage. But there's a more slow-burning courage that is needed when you're working in a team and you see something not going right, and you really have to build that capacity in yourself. So I encourage each of you to look for small ways in which you can act more courageously in support of your leaders, to constructively dissent. Because if you do that, then in the rare instance when it takes a lot of courage because something is really awry, you will have developed that way of being. It's not just that you do following courageously. You have to sort of become this as part of your identity, that you act as a principled person with integrity who will speak up in the interest of the mission and in support of the values. Thank you.